I'm Alice Lavinia Rankin Beard. I was born at Isabella, California, April the 9th, 1915, on what was called the Lower Ranch, which was a few miles out of Isabella. My mother was Mary Alice Williams. Her father was Nicholas J. Williams and said to be the first white child born in Kern County. And my father was Walker Rankin Jr. I had one sister, Rachel, and we were 18 months apart. I was a year and a half older than she was. Actually, I don't remember life at the Lower Ranch much. I remember hearing stories about it and how the wind could certainly blow and how it blew the roof right off the house at one point. We moved up to what is now known as the Bloomfield Ranch, which is, I think it's about 6 miles up out of Onyx. And the Smiths were our neighbors. I started the first grade at the Weldon School and went there through the third grade and rode the bus down with some Indian children that were my friends. There was Barney Sam and Sam, and there was Meldrin Andreas, and we picked up people all along the way. I remember picking up, we always called him Chicken Boone. I believe his name was Charles Boone. He was an only child, but he was one of the older boys, and he had discovered smoking. And it was great conversation on the bus, because when they let Chicken Boone off to go home in the afternoon, we were informed that Chicken actually didn't go home, but he went up behind a rock where he had some Bull Durham and paper and some matches, and he'd have a little smoke before he went home. And that was big gossip on the bus. And so we would come over and visit my grandmother, plus our cousins, Leroy and Bill, who were just like 1-2 years older than we were, than Rachel and I were. And so they had the bright idea, our cousins, big movers and shakers they were, that if we would show up with the Bull Durham, they would furnish the paper and the matches, and we could roll our own cigarettes. So when we would go to the Onyx store and our folks were in shopping, Rach and I had our little Bull Durham sack, and we'd go and pick up the butts of cigarettes that the Indians would pitch out there, and we empty that tobacco in our little sack, and so that when we came over to the basin the next time, we could hold up our end of the bargain. Leroy was the oldest of the four of us, and he thought that a good place for us to go and test out our cigarettes would be up on a little hill back of the house where there was a tank, storage tank for water. And we would have privacy up there. So that's where we went, trudging off up that hill, the four of us, Leroy and Bill first, and Rach was the last, she was the littlest. And we went up there and sat down back of this tank. And they, of course, took over from there. We showed up with our tobacco, and they knew how to fill the sack, and then you licked the paper to seal it, and then you turned up the end, and they built these cigarettes and handed them on down the line. Rach got the first one, and so forth. And we really had just gotten them all built. Nobody had lit up yet. Well, Aunt Julia had missed us and wondered, where are those kids? And she came up this hill and found us all four. There's like 4 crows sitting there. She went down the line with an open hand and she just whacked us each right on the jaw. It was smarted, I'll tell you. And I think I could have been 8 and Rach was about 6 and Leroy and Bill were 9 and 10, like that. And I never smoked again. I never ever touched another cigarette, ever. this is called the Lightner Ranch. And my Uncle Ned was on this ranch, and Uncle Ned died. And my grandmother wanted my father to come back to this ranch and sell the Bloomfield Ranch. We came to Walker's Basin in 1922, and there wasn't a suitable school, so the folks bought a house in Bakersfield, and Rachel and I started school at the Franklin School in Bakersfield, and Rachel was in the 2nd grade and I was in the 4th grade. And then we went through Emerson Junior High School and Bakersfield High School, Bakersfield College, and then I graduated from UCLA. We were into everything at school, didn't miss a thing. And we went to the football games and we went to the dances, but we came home every Friday night. And my mother just simply waited until we finished what we were doing, and then we'd come home. And the Lions Trail wasn't paved at that time, so sometimes we had to put on chains. Miserable experience, but having to put on chains. And we very often had some other students and friends with us. And but we'd come home, and this area where we are right now, it was the kitchen, and there was an old wood stove. And on the wood stove, there was always a pot of beans. And when we arrived home, the first thing we did was get a dish of beans, a piece of homemade bread with homemade butter, and a glass of milk. And everybody had a bite. And then we went to the middle room of the adobe part of this house, which was the sitting room, and there was an old player piano there. You know, the kind you sit and you pump with your feet and then the keys move. And of course, any of our friends just thought this was a great experience. And they played that player piano, which was situated on the wall exactly opposite my parents' bedroom. They never once said, "It's time to go to bed, you guys, knock it off." They never once said that. They were happy we were home, and they knew where we were. But we didn't want to be anyplace else. When the sun would start to set over Breckenridge Mountain and the shadows elongate, I knew we had to pack up to go back to town. And we did. We left about 4 o'clock on Sunday and went to school all week. And my mother was a conscientious mother, and my dad couldn't have been a better dad. They didn't want us to lack for anything, so every day we did something different after school. On one day we would go to dancing lessons. And I remember it was upstairs at the Women's Club, and we took dancing lessons. My sister was left-handed, and she never ever figured out which was her left foot and which was her right foot. We had a good laugh about that every time. And then another day we would take piano lessons. Another day we would, my father retained his membership in the Elks Club so that we could go to the Elks Club swimming pool and take swimming lessons. I think that's the only series of lessons that really stuck as far as I was concerned. I couldn't tell you where middle C is now as far as the piano goes. But I did teach some dancing. I did teach folk dancing as part of my college major. And then the fourth day, we went to what it seems to be was called elocution lessons, and was given by Miss Piers. And Miss Piers gave us instruction on how to introduce people, how to enter a room, how to sit, how to put on your coat, how to set a table, Um, but actually, we learned quite a bit from Miss Piers. So that took care of all of our weekdays, and then Friday we went home to the ranch again. We did whatever my dad was doing. I've been over every foot of this ranch horseback. Part of the time, early times, we didn't have, we rode barefoot actually. We didn't have boots. And sometimes we rode double. We never complained. We wanted to go. We wanted to be included. And if ever we would say, gee, I am pretty thirsty or something like that, my dad would say, what's the matter, can't you take it? And that'd silence us right away. We didn't want to ever be cut back. But he treated us like boys. And then we went along, and then we got our own saddles, and finally we got boots. And we just went and participated and rode every place. All over, I've been all over every place on this ranch. Well, it was indeed part of everybody's life, getting the cattle moved to the high country. And my mother just loved always going, and we did too. The very first time I ever went, I went sitting on a pillow in front of on the front of my father's saddle. I think I was 18 months old. And then we would go every summer, and we had the Powell Meadow just above the Fish Creek Meadow, and the Smiths were our neighbors. And then below them was the Ann and Jim Robertson and their daughter Evelyn. Evelyn was an only child, and they had a nice cozy cabin. Evelyn invited us to come and spend the night with her one time, and oh, it was such a nice cabin. And we were it was time to go to bed, and everybody was getting prepared, and we were in. Evelyn, Rach, and I were all in one bed, and then it was Ann and Jim went in another bed right beside us, and then there was a table there with a glass of water on it. And Jim Robertson had one glass eye. And first of all, in his preparations, he slipped his false teeth out and put them in the glass of water, and then he popped out his eye and put that in the glass of water, and by then my sister was sitting straight up in bed and her eyes just popped open wide. And he said, "Don't worry, Rachie," he says, "I always put my eye in there to watch my teeth." And then men got reputations for being good packers. Stanley Smith had a reputation for being an excellent packer. He could balance those pack saddles, those pannier things, and his packs seldom ever turned. And when a pack saddle turns and that whole thing winds up under a mule, it's a real rodeo, you know. But he was good at it, my dad was good at it. Well, we loved fishing up there because you could go down in the meadow, and the banks were cut so that the banks would come over, and it was just a narrow opening, and you could ooze over there on your belly and look over and drop your bait in and watch the fish strike the bait. It's the best of all worlds, and then pull your fish out. Oh, we loved that. And fry them right up, rolled in cornmeal, just delicious. It's a wonderful memory to have. We loved taking trips out from Fish Creek and riding to, over to Jordan Hot Springs and riding to Beach Meadow. I remember going to Beach Meadow. There was Clarence Allen and another Allen, and one of them was a ranger, it seems to me. But I was so impressed with how clean that cabin was. The sink boards were wood, and the floor was wood, and he just simply scoured those surfaces every day, and he used ashes, and it bleached the wood, and they were just so clean, which was kind of impressed you, because our camps had dirt floors, and there was a lot of dust. Time we ever came out of the mountains, we were always just coated with dirt and dust. So we were impressed with that cleanliness, but it was great fun. Sometimes I remember coming home, and we didn't beat the darkness, and being reassured that, don't worry, the horses can see, they know what they're doing. And so, but we made it home safely, trusting the horses. Well, yes, the Women's Club was just a really active organization. They'd got a lot done, and the very first president of the South Fork Women's Club was Aunt Ella, Mrs. Warren Rankin. And the second one was Julia, Mrs. Lee Rankin, and the third one was Mary, Mrs. Walker Rankin, my mother. They raised funds for the war effort, and then they had showers for people who were expecting babies or who were brides, and they met at homes. And when they met at homes, it seems to me they all brought their babies with them, because there are pictures that show us all there. And I know in one picture, I'm there with my mother, and Helen Rankin is there with her mother, Cleo Cross, who was Cleo Tilley. And they're there, and Aunt Julia is there holding Leroy. And I think that Cleo and Helen are up on a step, and Leroy and Aunt Julia are down a little bit in this picture. And Helen says, I had my eye on Leroy even then. It seems like she was looking at him. And part of what they did was raise money to build a hall for dancing and supper dances and so forth. So that it turned out that one weekend the dance would be in the Women's Club Hall at South Fork, and then another weekend it would be in Bechtel's Hall in Kernville. And it was just, everybody went. You just simply didn't miss the dances. They were just occasions, and everyone brought a cake. And you had a break in the action, which was called the supper dance. And everybody quit, and they went and had a piece of cake and coffee at some point. Then it allowed the children to have the run of the floor. And they put, I think it was cornmeal, on the floor, and it made it really slick. And we'd shake a little bit out there, and then you'd run and then set your brakes and slide, and you could go the distance of the room practically. It was a real ride. It was great fun. And when you entered the hall there, on one side was a wood stove where all the men gathered around that wood stove. The women were mostly up in the kitchen, and then on the other side of the door was an anteroom, and in that were 2 bunk beds built out of wood, and the women took their coats in there and put them down. And I remember when you got tired as a child, you could go in there and climb on one of those bunks in among all those coats, and the fur smelled like talcum powder, and perfume. It was a heavenly thing. And part of the fun was the conversations that went on the next day by the telephone, And everybody would review information they had about whether or not Don Hanning was there with his merchandise, and who went out to visit with Don Hanning, and what a neat, friendly guy he really was, and how really wily he was. And they speculated a lot about where his stills were. Nobody really knew, I don't think. But he would make this whiskey, and then he'd show up at the dances with his bottles, and then I don't know how much it was. It was some kind of a price structure, I'm sure. But you could go out there and get a swig of whiskey, and then some fellas went fairly often, and by the end of the dance, you know, they were just a little bit loose-limbed. And then there was always the fear that the federales or the T-men or somebody would come and find Don, take him away forever. But that never happened. He always got word, and he could fold up and leave right away. And so that always was a lot of comment about that, how Don got away. They didn't find him. Oh, a bit part, yeah, in the movies. Oh, that was always great fun. It caused a lot of conversation and people talking about who did what for the movies, you know. Yeah, I remember one day I earned $7. I was standing in a crowd, and all I needed to do was clap. And I wore a bonnet and a kind of a pioneer type dress that really didn't come together in the back, and it was held together with pins and things. And somebody he was an orator, and he made a big speech. I think it was a 4th of July speech in the movie. And then all I had to do at the end was clap, and I got $7 for it, and I thought I was overpaid. It was wonderful. What a salary. It was when they built the Lions Trail, they built it to shorten the distance, to bring the equipment up to KR3, to build the plant at KR3. And all of the equipment for that plant was offloaded at Caliente, which at that time was, I think, called Allen's Camp. But they put in the Lions Trail, which comes from Caliente through Walker's Basin, and the first stop out of Caliente was the Rankin Ranch, where my grandmother Lavinia and her husband Walker Rankin welcomed the teamsters, and there was a barn just on the west side of the road where the teamsters could put their horses up, and then they could come to the house, and they had rooms upstairs at the house, and my grandmother fed them. And everyone participated on the family. My grandmother's sons could all cook and help in the kitchen. But for breakfast, they always had hot mush, rolled oats, and that was topped with clotted cream and sugar. There was coffee, there were biscuits, there was steak that had been dredged in flour and salt and pepper, and white tallow, heated, chopped fine and heated, and brought to the point of smoking. And then these steaks were put into that hot tallow and quickly fried. Eggs, bacon, and biscuits, and homemade butter, and jam, fresh jams, homemade jams. And of course, everybody worked hard those days, and we can't do it anymore that way. The picture at the Palace Hotel was taken in, I think it was 1921. That was at the California Cattlemen's Convention, and it was always at the Palace Hotel, and always just a wonderful occasion. And we would go on the train. We were allowed to stay out of school to go to the convention. And what wonderful memories of we would spend the night on the train, and how the porters would come and make up the beds. Oh, it was so much fun to watch them whip those beds out, and the white sheets and towels. And going to the dining car, and then arriving in San Francisco, and the taxi, and the process of hailing a taxi. That was so much news to us from Walker's Basin. And then I remember one year we had wool coats that had fur collars, and my dad got us each a bouquet of violets, which were sold by flower vendors on the street of San Francisco, and we pinned our bouquets on our collars, and the wonderful damp, sweet smell of those violets in that fur it was just heaven. Then also the fur collar had a muff that you could put your hands in to keep them warm. It was matching fur to your collar. So we felt very dressy. And so the Palace Hotel had such a feeling of grandeur about it, and it was a lovely old hotel. The fun of being in it, also we were each bought a helium balloon, and we got into the Palace Hotel, and Rachel's balloon got away from her and got lodged clear out of sight practically. And she was she was unhappy about that. Oh, she just wanted her balloon. She was immediately supplied with another one. She didn't have to wait long. And I remember the ballroom at the Palace Hotel with the lovely old chandeliers, crystal chandeliers, and the chairs, the bent back chairs, were all painted gold. And the cattlemen and the cattlewomen, all the women were really very well dressed. And the cattlemen, with their ruddy cheeks and faces and their white foreheads, always set them apart. My husband, Bob Beard, was a flying instructor, and he came down and, well, what happened, he came to my house one Monday morning, and he was assigned to go to Bakersfield High School. All of the pilots were required to take Spanish, and he was headed there. So we had advertised our house as available. Rachel and I didn't want the house, we wanted an apartment. And he was living at the Padre Hotel with other Air Force people, and they didn't want to eat out any longer. They wanted a house and a cook. So we had advertised our house as available, and he was going in the neighborhood. So they said, Beard, you go by and check out the house. So he came one Monday morning and said he'd seen the advertisement and liked to see the house. I said, well, all right, it's all torn up because it's Monday and I'm washing, and all the sheets everything is torn up. Well, he said he didn't mind. So we toured the house, and we were standing in the dining room talking about it, and my sister was getting ready to go to work. And she had to go by a door to the bathroom, and every time she went from our bedroom to the bathroom, she looked a little better. And she would have on more makeup, or she'd have on a tie, or a different sweater or something. And it turned out later that he was thinking, aha, she'll do for my friend Grumbles. So anyway, he went away, and having inspected the house, and he called back, and it wasn't more than 5 minutes to the first telephone. And he called back and he said, my name is Bob Beard. He said, I don't know if you remember me. I looked at your house. And he said, there's going to be an officers' dance this Friday night at the Motel Inn. I wonder if you'd go with me. And I said, well, yes, I'd like to go. So that was in June. And I had been teaching swimming, and I thought I looked just dreadful. I was too dark, I thought. But anyway, it seemed like he approved. And so we went to the dance. He actually that night asked me to marry him. Well, he didn't put it quite that way. And come live with me. And I said, well, there are a few hurdles we'll have to accomplish before that would happen, you know. And so anyway, we were married in August. And we gave the folks, he had a week of leave, and I thought that was not, it was an imposition to try to get ready in a week. And Bob's father was a Presbyterian minister in Portland, and we thought, well, we'll go up and have Grandchap marry us. And my father said, who never said anything, my father was a silent man, and but wonderful father. But he said, why doesn't Toady get married here? And that's what I wanted, of course. So we changed, plans changed, and well, we got out the hoses and the brooms and whatever and began to knock the cobwebs down and slick things up. And we were married, in fact, right here. And we were married in the front yard by the lilac bush. Well, it turns out that the lilac bush, along with 4 locust trees, were planted by my grandmother, Lavinia, and her sister, Mary, when they first came to Walker's Basin. And when Mary Leitner married Dan Walser, they were married in the yard by the lilac bush. And then 4 years later, my grandmother, Lavinia, married Walker Rankin by the lilac bush. And Bob and I were next, I guess, and now there have been 11 weddings. It's a famous old bush by now. When I was in the 4th grade, I couldn't tell you why, but I made up my mind that I wanted to be a physical education teacher. I wanted to have 4 children. I wanted to marry. I wasn't interested in marrying for money, but I wanted to marry a good man and a family man. And I wanted to go to UCLA. And I did all those things. It's easy to do. You don't set your goals too high. You can attain them with ease. Mm-hmm. So I went down to UCLA, and Herman Spent was principal of Bakersfield High School. And he told me that if I would graduate, he would have a job for me when I came home. So as soon as I got out of UCLA, I had a job at Bakersfield High School. Yes, the Air Force years were interesting. We moved about every 6 months, and it was fun. I didn't really mind it because they send enlisted men to pack up all your belongings. You know, you don't have to pack a thing. So we came back in 1946, and Bob was separated from the Air Force at that time. And we came back to the ranch here. And then in 1970, we got an opportunity to participate in a ranch in El Paso, Texas, and partnered with Joe Mendeborough. And it was a ranch that's actually owned by the University of Texas. And we were associated, we were there for 25 years. And enjoyed those years very much, and I enjoyed Texas. It's an unusual setup because the university gives you 10-year leases, which is a wonderful thing for a cow and calf outfit. It gives you time to get some cattle grown up and so forth. You know, short leases are difficult. And it's a fine ranch. It's about 114,000 acres. I was just amazed when we first went down there because I would ride out on those fields, and I felt like I could look at the curvature of the earth. There was just nothing to disturb your view until I became acquainted with the place, you know. But fortunately, it's not as flat as some places in Texas. They say, you know, about Midland and Odessa, that country, you literally cannot see a rise anyplace. They say that it's one of the only places in the country you can stand on a sardine can and see another 350 miles. And that's how it is. The cattle business has been pretty precarious, and you don't need to think you're going to make $1 million in the cattle business, because you need to love the way of life, which is not hard to do. It's a marvelous way to have been raised and to have raised a family. And our kids often talk about it, about how lucky they feel to have been raised on a cattle ranch, because you can early on own things. You can own a horse, and you can own a dog, you can own a saddle. You're responsible then, and you got to take care of those things. You can participate and be included with adults. You can be treated as a man and put to work right away. And learning, you don't know how much you're learning, and it's so easy to do. You're absorbing all kinds of techniques and attitudes toward livestock, and you're learning about weather, and you're learning about markets, and you're learning about mathematics, and you're learning about many things that you couldn't describe at the time. So plus it's a wonderful thing, because you don't have any neighbors, and you can be just as loud as you want to be and boisterous.
I ride an old paint, I lead an old dam. I'm going to Montana to throw a hula hand. They feed in the coulees, they water in the draw. Their tails are all matted, their backs are all raw. Ride around, ride around real slow. The fiery and the snuffy are raring to go. Well, when I die, take my saddle from the wall, put it on my pony and lead him from his stall. Tie my bones to his back, turn our faces to the west, and we'll ride the prairie that we like the best. Ride around real slow. Well, the fiery and the snuffy are raring to go. Ride around real slow. Well, the fiery and the snuffy are raring